An efficient governance structure and system for cities are very important. When disasters and emergencies happen, swift and coordinated responses are required to mitigate and manage the consequences. For long term growth, it is also critical that the plans can be executed without delay, with cohesiveness to an overall strategy. Through the Rockefeller Foundation's Resilient Cities initiative, cities around the world have been encouraged to focus on five key directions. One city is a direction which hopes to solve or improve the issue of disjointed governance. For example, in 2004, there was an Ebola outbreak in Dallas, Texas, and because of confusion on the responsibilities between the Federal Centers of Disease Control and Prevention and the local bodies, people died. More recently, in London, a multi-million pound redevelopment of a hotel was put in jeopardy after a council challenged the rejection of the planning permit from the Historical Environment Division. This delay and infighting is the sort of thing that leads to a loss of confidence by investors and can seriously affect a city's capital flow. Disjointed governance is not just a global problem but can be seen in abundance in Sydney. It continually makes media headlines with criticism stating local councils are making cities less livable. The current system is promoting distrust, declining cohesion, and inequality, and the red tape is excessively delaying projects from the start. Sydney's disjointed governance stems from a number of factors, which have clear negative impacts on the city. The city's three layer of governance, local, state, and federal, create overlapping duties and the need for an excessive number of approvals, which leads to a delayed planning permission and little to no accountability. The NSW Productivity Commission recently stated that it took twice as long to get a development approval in Sydney compared to Victoria or Queensland. Sydney's 100 plus stakeholders means it is nearly impossible to come up with integrated decisions and a coherent vision on issues. This has scuttled attempts to start a high rail network in Sydney. Sydney's large number of local councils has also created problem, leading to initiatives not going ahead because of the excessive number of approvals it would need. No clear leadership is also an issue in disjointed governance, which leads to nobody taking responsibility and problems go on. For example, local libraries in Sydney have had their state funding cut, which have put pressure on local councils to consider contributing more to the library budgets or cutting the service altogether. One key issue where disjointed governance has had a great impact is the issue of affordable and sustainable housing. The strict zoning laws in Sydney and the need for multiple permissions have meant the city no longer responds to needed demand and takes a long time to approve affordable housing developments, if at all. This has forced many people out of Sydney to its outskirts, additionally causing pressure on transport infrastructure. There also appears to be no real incentive to improve the sustainability of old or new construction. To come up with potential solutions for Sydney, we shall be looking afar to Tokyo and London to see if we can learn lessons on how to address these issues. Tokyo has a number of interesting policies in place. They have by right development, which means that instead of requiring permissions for each development, the cumbersome discretionary review process is bypassed as long as a project conforms to a zone's remit. Tokyo has only 12 zones, which are more or less categorized by nuisance levels. Each level, higher up on the nuisance scale, automatically allows the inclusion of lower levels. So, an industrial use zone, for example, would allow the residential developments which promotes more mixed use. The city also has recognizing declining property values by setting a depreciable life on developments, which means councils receive less property taxes the older a development is. This incentivizes councils to build new developments. London fast tracks affordable housing projects as long as they comprise 35% of a project if on private land and 50% if on public land. In 2010, the UK launched the Affordable Housing Programme, which from 2021 to 2026 has had a £12 billion grant programme for developers wishing to construct affordable homes. Of this, London administers £4 billion or the one third. The city also has benefited from London Green Fund, which consists of three targeted funds, includes the Greener Social Housing Urban Development Fund. The Greener Social Housing Urban Development Fund is allocated money which they use to make existing social housing projects more sustainable. For example, the Housing Finance Corporation Limited was a recipient of funds from the Greener Social Housing Urban Development Fund. to refurbish over 2,500 properties to make them more environmental friendly, including upgrading to triple glazed windows, external and internal, sold walls, insulation, etc. Sydney would do well to adopt some of these solutions, though we should be mindful of additional local considerations. Number one, by right development is a useful tool to speed up the development process in Sydney. The local councils, though, would be furious at having their discretionary powers taken away. Perhaps the state government could consider setting a series of benchmarks, such as statutory timelines to approve plans and cut the number of objection reasons. If these benchmarks weren't met consistently for 2 years in a row, then by right development would be implemented. The carrot and stick incentive could shake up the complacency and speed up the communications, though it should be said there is a risk councils may reject more applications as a speedy resolution to get through the numbers. Number two, simplifying the zoning, as Tokyo has a lot of advantages to promote more mixed use. It seems logical that if a higher nuisance level zone of, say, industrial were approved, there would be little chance of objection to residential or commercial uses under that. Quiet residential zones under this are still protected as stringently. Number three, depreciating property values for the calculation of property taxes could be adopted where green projects could be calculated at half the asset life as compared to normal properties. That would incentivize demand for greener constructions. The corresponding risk to this measure is that councils would be concerned about its implementation, leading to an immediate loss of revenue. Existing older properties might suddenly become exempt. One solution could be that every property is assessed at starting off at year zero, or applying a formula that assures at least some useful life for the next couple of decades. Number four, the state government should assist Sydney in funding similar initiatives to the Affordable Housing Program and Green Fund, which Sydney would administer. These measures could be replicated and funded across the entire state in many cities and towns. Number five, a similar fast track procedure as London has should be put in the place across councils in Sydney for affordable housing. Since the state government does not have the power to dictate council policy, though, they could financially induce councils by linking non compliance of this policy to a percentage in overall funding cuts. The recommendations, it should be said, assumes that two things can and will happen. First is financial leadership shown by and the government support of the state government of New South Wales to fund an affordable housing program and green fund, and financially induce councils to implement fast track systems for affordable housing. Second is political leadership by the state government to incentivize councils to speed up their decision making or risk by right development, and for the NSW Department of Planning to change zoning policy, both which will probably require parliamentary changes to legislations. Given the huge challenges and priorities of COVID at the moment, it would not be realistic to put a time frame on these measures. It is hoped, though, that these measures are looked at Sydney in the near future, as the direction of one city as it relates to affordable housing and sustainable development definitely would suggest Sydney is in need of urgent reform.